Our next conversation, LaTosha Brown. We say good morning to her, the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. She has been out in the We Won't Black Down bus tour. She mobilizes black voters to know and use their power. We met her during the presidential race in 2020. So great to have you back with us, LaTosha. Good morning and hello again.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Listen, you were listening to Magda's reporting there. Overall, here we are on the air with you this morning, kind of like we were in 2020 when we didn't have a clear idea. But based on the results that we have so far, what's your overall impression of the midterm result?
You know, it's interesting. In Georgia, I have to say, here we are again, right? Here we go again. But I think that when we're looking at overall, what was supposed to be a red wave, what we saw wound up being a red dribble, that ultimately, across the country, you did not see the kind of gains with the Republican Party that was as expected. And I think you're still seeing some critical races out right now that we're still looking at Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia. I think that's going to be really significant. No one expected. There were very few that expected to see most people expected more gains, with the Republican Party. And so I think there's a number of things that we're seeing. I think that there is a certain kind of, while we know that there are rumors that Trump is going to run for president again, I think what we saw is I think we saw some of the backlash to the Republican Party in this midterm election. I think has resulted from their alignment with Trump. I think that there is an element of people that are looking to move forward and want to see something different. I think that's what you saw across. I think that was significant in the Pennsylvania Senate race. I think secondly, when you young voters also played a key in this election. And three, I think what we're also looking at is a deeply, deeply divided country politically, that this is a very, very close race in all of the states. And I think that speaks to.
Just hold on with me, LaTosha. Your image has frozen there with us from Atlanta, and I just want to. Oh, okay, good. We just lost your image. We just lost our feed to you, LaTosha, but we've got it back, so I'll carry on. You mentioned some of the things indicative, and the alliance with Donald Trump. That's playing out very much in your state. You're there in Georgia, so you mentioned we know it's very tight, likely headed to a runoff in December. But Herschel Walker, of course, Trump backed, and Raphael Warnock. Very, very close, but nobody looking like it's going to be a 50% plus one. So a runoff seeming likely in Georgia. Just to give a read on, that's obviously a key state, obviously very tight as it was in 2020. What are you thinking about your home state?
I think we'll definitely have a runoff. I think we're looking to have a runoff in the state. I think it's really going to be interesting to figure out how Walker moves forward. And I think when you look in the state, you look in the governor's race, what Kemp was able to do, I think is be able to separate himself, saying that he's the guy that stood up to Trump. And I think that resonated with Republican voters, which is why he had a larger voter spread. It's going to be interesting to see how this Walker campaign, which they've also tried to distance themselves from Trump in this last election cycle, but it's going to be interesting to see how when we're moving forward. But what's really promising is that Warnock is leading. I think you see a significant rise in black voter turnout in the state of Georgia, but this is far from being over.
Well, that is, of course, your big push. Look at the black voter turnout, because we have some really interesting numbers. And you mentioned Kemp, who defeated Stacey Abrams for the governor's race again in the state of Georgia. But on terms of turnout along the racial divide, Herschel Walker has 70% of the white vote. Raphael Warnock has 90% of the black vote. And then in that governor's race, Stacey Abrams had 79% of the non-white vote, 90% of the black vote, and Brian Kemp with 74% of the white vote. Those are the numbers we have this morning. What does that tell you?
I think it tells us that we're in a state that is deeply, deeply racially divided, that we're in a state that in terms of progress moving forward, what we see is we're seeing that their lines are drawn in the same. I think we're also in a state that we can't forget. This was ground zero for voter suppression laws. This is the first major election that we've had since the passage of SB 202. Has that impacted the voting process? Absolutely. The mail-in ballots, there were 1.2 million last election cycle. What we're seeing now is 0.2 million. That means 1 million people who participated in mail-in ballots.
Yeah, just bear with us for just one moment. I think we're going to.
Am I back?
Sorry about that. We're just having a little bit of signal problem with you, LaTosha, and I appreciate what you're telling us, so I don't want to lose you. There you are, back. You can carry on from where you were. We just lost. We were just sort of mid-sentence. We didn't lose too much. Carry on.
Okay, I'm so sorry. So I think that there's a number of things, considerations. One, I think there was a 31,000 different spread between when you saw this in the governor's race between Stacey Abrams and Warnock. I think that meant that I think Warnock was able to actually capture some moderate Republican voters who literally were, I think Walker was just too much for them. That it was just his campaign, his candidacy, which has been riddled with controversy, I think in many ways has been too much for them. Secondly, I think we have to recognize that this is the first major election in the state of Georgia since the voter suppression bill.
That's unfortunate. I think that's just where we lost last time, LaTosha. Are you back? I'll give you a carry on. Okay.
So can you hear me now?
I can. Okay. We got to get you a better connection down there in Atlanta.
We got to get a better connection. I don't know what's happening.
I don't know what's going on. Okay, we did catch part of your voter suppression law. Let me ask you this, though, because I do want to have a couple more minutes remaining with you. We've talked, as we've had conversations previously, about how voters of color are going to be the future of American politics. And so I'm wondering, as you look at what we know so far, and maybe even talk about what happened in Miami-Dade County, which has voted very strong Hispanic population there, voted Republican for the first time overwhelmingly for Ron DeSantis and the Republicans. So based on what you're seeing and talking to people at those polls yesterday, what does the future look to you?
I think we have to recognize we're in this transition period in this country, that what we're looking at younger voters participating in the process. And I think voters of color are going to have a tremendous impact. I also think that when we're looking in this period of transition, that we also have to take in consideration some of the voter suppression tactics and the misinformation tactics that have been spread throughout, and the fear tactics that have been spread throughout this process. When you look at Florida, DeSantis, one of the things that he also created is he created a whole force around a voter security force, literally, that was actually targeting folks, particularly targeting formerly incarcerated or returning citizens who had actually went to the county, literally got the county said that they could register to vote. They actually voted and literally were later arrested, not only arrested, but in dramatic ways. And so I think that there's a level, I think he's effectively used this vehicle of fear. I think that he is using his platform to run for governor to say that, yes, I'm actually more aggressive than Trump. I think we know that he has interest in running for president in the 2024 election. I think we see some of that playing itself out. Voters of color will be key, and I think that neither party can take them for granted. I think the Democratic Party cannot take them for granted, nor the Republican Party. I think it is going to be who has the message that will speak to the nuances of the needs or the policy desires of those communities of color. I think that is going to make a significant difference as we look in future elections. And simply, I think the Democrats were not able to do that in the state of Florida, and there was very little investment by the Democratic Party in these statewide races in the state of Florida, and I think that's what we're seeing play out.
So we'll see how it plays out then for 2024. I'm looking forward to the conversations we'll have ahead of the next presidential campaign, because you're right, Ron DeSantis making all the signals that we'll be hearing from him when it comes to seeking the Republican nomination. LaTosha, thank you for all of the information today and for soldiering on, even though we had some technical challenges there. I really always appreciate your perspective. We'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
LaTosha Brown in Atlanta for us. Now, from